I'm Gary. I'm an alcoholic.
My name's Bob Olson. I'm an alcoholic.
Bob and I were. The likelihood of us doing a second hour are slim to none. I thought I'd better let you know that.
He's showing deference to my age. So my next birthday is 80. So I got up at 3:45 this morning to leave Denver, and there were avalanche warnings in the mountains. They had 4 to 10 inches up there today. So this is quite a bit different than what I was experiencing. Gary wants to ask you a couple of questions. I'm very interested in your answers.
Back a little bit to the history of the Fellowship of the Spirit. The Fellowship of the Spirit was designed to be a conference for Alcoholics Anonymous members who frankly do the steps through the Big Book like we do them. And we came from a background of Alcoholics Anonymous with a belief in the 12 traditions, primarily the 5th tradition, that we're here to help the alcoholic who still suffers. Now, I bring that up because I heard a little bit of your introduction. This was this thing from all programs. And then you brought Bob and I in, and we don't have any experience with all programs. I've never stuck any kind of drug in my arm or up anywhere else for that matter. I've never smoked a joint. Don't know that. I know we have people coming from other fellowships come into our AA meeting trying to change it, and it hasn't worked, and our meeting has grown. It's a Tuesday night discussion meeting and have 60 people there who are there about to talk about their alcoholism, and they don't talk about their drugs or any of that other stuff. Our format reads that it's an open meeting and anybody's welcome to attend. We did that because we had belligerent drug addicts coming in the middle of December, and there was nowhere to send them to a meeting without they're freezing their ass trying to get to the next one. With that, so we changed our format. We opened the meeting for anybody to attend, and it says that it's an open meeting. All are welcome here. The speaking is for alcoholics only. And if you're asked to speak and you can't talk about your experience with recovery from alcoholism, then you're expected to pass. And since then, we haven't had any trouble. We've grown from about 15 to 20 people to 60 people on a Tuesday night, and it's a very successful meeting. And one of your pretty young ladies from out here was there 2 or 3 weeks ago that Tarek had sent us, and that. I haven't gone to that. I've heard around from other people who do a lot of talking around the country who are really concerned about FOTS meetings, Fellowship of the Spirit conferences around the country. There's another one out on the West Coast who has speakers from all the other deals. And that's where the stories got out of what was going on with the FOTS meeting with that, and they've never done that together. That particular one I'm talking about, Bob was asked to talk and found out there were people from other 12-step programs going to speak there, and he backed out. He didn't do it. So that means they missed a really good talk. Might have been the best one at the fellowship. So I'm just going to throw that out as concerned. If you're here and you've got other problems, God bless you. I want the best for you. But our 5th tradition says I'm here to help alcoholics because I don't know about any of the other stuff. I just don't. But I know the steps work in my line. And I have friends that, well, most people you see come into Alcoholics Anonymous today have used other drugs. And going back to my experience around this, early in the Denver Young People's Group, we were meeting, and some of the people were coming in introducing themselves as alcoholics and drug abusers. That was the lingo at the time. And quite a time went by, and they were doing it. Bob sponsored, and the guy I sponsored and all that was one of them that used to do that. And then one day we came in there, and I noticed they weren't doing that anymore. They were just alcoholics at an AA meeting. And I asked Don about that, and I said, what is that? What's going on with you guys? Because I was dumber than a box of rocks. I didn't know. And he said, well, the treatment centers helped me out with that. He said, they talked about our drug of choice. He says, my drug of choice was meth. I had to drink. I couldn't stop drinking. I couldn't do it. I'm not a drug addict. I'm an alcoholic. And I throw that out for some of you to consider, because most of you have alcohol in your lives, or you wouldn't be sitting here with this. But please don't lose track of your primary purpose. You're getting lots and lots of heat from the recovery business out there, trying to make it look better. So we got people coming in AA in Indianapolis believing that going to meetings and not drinking is treating their alcoholism. And it doesn't do that. That's not what it's designed to do. The program with the 12 steps as it's laid out in the book, Alcoholics Anonymous, is what does that. And so that's what we're here to hope to share, as far as I know. And I don't know what you might want to add to that, but if at all.
Nothing except, we kind of came on the scene a long time ago. And cocaine wasn't even around yet. There were a few people that were like Arthur Conan Doyle and some of those people that found out what it was and were using it. But my experience is, if somebody would have given me some white powder and told me to put it up my nose, I would have decked them. I can't even imagine that. So I never did that, and the only time I ever came up against a bunch of people smoking dope, I had just gotten out of the military in 1960, and it was New Year's Eve, and this woman walked in the bar who was very attractive, but she had blue hair, and which wasn't fashionable at the time. And she sat down next to me in the bar, and she said, would you like to go to a party? And I said, yeah. And, for me, a party was drinking and getting laid, excuse me. And so I said, okay, and we went upstairs in the hotel, and she opened the door, and the smoke just rolled out of there. And there were a bunch of people, and some of them had grocery sacks over their heads. And I said, what the hell are you doing? And she said, smoking reefer. And I said, are you talking about marijuana? And she said, yeah. And I said, when's the party going to start? And she said, it started. And I said, not for me, I'll see you later. And that was my experience with smoking dope. So, I'm just an old juicer. And I'm as bad a one as anybody you ever met. And this whole thing saved my life, and I am prone to guarding it jealously. So I don't know much about that other stuff. If you'd like to hear how we recover from alcoholism, God bless you, I'm glad you're here. I don't know what else we could do for you, though, because neither one of us have ever had any experience with any of that other stuff. So that's it.
I grew up on an experimental farm outside of Cheyenne, Wyoming. And there's not a whole lot in Cheyenne, Wyoming to tell you about, so that part will be brief. But it was cowboy country and oil patch country. And where I grew up out there, I would watch the phenomenon that went along amongst the older hands that worked out there. And it seemed my dad and some of the others' attitude changed kind of miraculously, kind of sudden on Friday night and Saturday. And I'd watch that, and I'd watch them drinking whatever it was they were drinking. And so I kind of picked up early that there was something magic going on there, and I just kind of parked that there for me for a while. And was curious about it. And as a kid, Dad didn't drink around to where we were parties and kids could run around and take drinks off the table or whatever the heck. That didn't happen. I wasn't around it that much. But I'd watch him change, and I'd watch him from an angry little guy that you had to watch him till he'd get drinking, he'd get happy. It was backwards from what I saw from some of my friends. And I got really curious about this booze and what it was doing. And I'd been with my parents one time when they'd been down the road at one of the neighbors' places. And they were just having a few drinks, and I could see the change happening. And I saw that they kept the liquor in a small pantry. And I could see all these different bottles. And so I thought I was going to try it. One day I saw them leave that experimental farm to go into town. And that was a half-hour ride just to get to town. Then they're going to be just another hour getting groceries, so they're gone for a while. And so when they left, I slid down the coal chute and went straight to that pantry. I wasn't interested in stealing anything else. And I'm popping tops and taking a slug of all that, and some of it was just awful. And I didn't know what any of it was. But that was really my first drinks I took. I had no idea what I was doing, and I had no idea what it was supposed to do to me. I heard a car coming up, and so I went, crawled back up out of that coal chute and got the hell out of there. And I don't know if they know I've been there yet. But I kind of always had this thing going. And then I was 16, scared of girls, scared to talk to anybody where there were strangers around. Barely getting by in school. And two other fellows and myself decided we were going to drive from Cheyenne over to Laramie to the state basketball tournament. And Wyoming, that was the first opportunity as teenagers you had to go somewhere and be mostly unchaperoned. Yeah! And so that's what had happened. And we'd all go there. And Bob and Kenny both found a couple of girls that wanted to go with us, and they had to do that part because I couldn't talk to the girl. But I figured I could get us some booze. And so I found a guy to buy us a quart of Four Roses, and got some Coca-Cola, and we went out to the boondocks to drink it. And the first time we passed it around, I did it like I'd watched everybody else. Most of them were pretty reasonable. They'd wipe it off from the previous guy and take a hit and pass it on. And the second time it came around to me, I turned it up, and they had to take it away from me because I tipped it there and got all the whiskey I could in a hurry. And something changed. And it was great. I had the most profound experience I'd ever had in my life. It was just wonderful. God, I felt good. I felt like I was everything I ever dreamed I'd be. And I could talk to the girls. Hell, I made a grab at one of them, but failed mystery. She slapped me around pretty good. Still proud of the grab. And later on, they took me to the truck stop to fill me full of coffee and sober me up, and it woke me up. And I had a little tussle with the cowboy, and he slapped me around a lot worse than that girl did. And then they put me to bed somewhere, and I don't remember where. And I remember waking up in the morning, and I felt just terrible, but I couldn't wait to go do it again. That was that great when I got that whiskey in me. It was just, I mean it. It was perfect. It was the best thing I ever knew. And that was pretty much, that was my total of my social drinking at that point. Anytime I took a drink after that, it was not to be social. I was looking for an effect that had worked better than anything I'd ever seen in my life. It had been just wonderful. I managed to graduate from high school, barely. I found a girl I could date in high school. But not drinking was still hard for me, but a friend of mine introduced me to this hot little redhead that I'd had my eye on, and she had gone. We were all out at a nice park there in Cheyenne, and she'd gone out there with another boy, but she went home with me. That just tells you how crazy she is. That was the start of the thing. I made the mistake of telling her I'd call her in the morning, and I did. And with any number of times I was given time out for bad behavior and all of that. We've been together for 58 years, married. It'll be 58 in August, plus 3 years in knocking around in high school. I was thinking about that here. I don't know if any of you here still are with the mates or the friends or your partners that you had when you before you really started drinking and that, but there might be some. And I think that just to throw it out in case I forget it, it's important for me to talk about, because she was attending later on. I got sober in the Nut House and found out I was an alcoholic in there. They kept me there for 16 weeks, which was the normal stay for alcoholism back then. Hit there on December 3rd of 64. Got out in March sometime of 65. And ended up getting a free ride to college at the University of Wyoming in Laramie. And so, the first AA meetings I attended on the streets were in Cheyenne. I don't remember much about them. I remember seeing some parents of guys I'd gone to school with in there, and they met me. Got another quick story. It was in that Nut House, and I found out I was an alcoholic in there. And probably the most important thing that happened to me in there is one day I was sitting down with some of the guys in the alcoholic ward. I was by far the youngest one there. And they were talking about what they were going to do when they got out of the Nut House. You know, one of them wanted to go back to the bridge, to the ranch in Fort Bridger, and another one was to go try to go out in the oil patch and make all that big money back. That's what got him there. And you know, get the families back to that. I'm sitting with these guys thinking I'm in a room full of has-beens. That struck me that I had never done anything. I was and never was. And they stopped talking and looked at me like it was my turn to speak. And I said, you know, I have no idea what I'm going to do when I get out of here. All I know is I never want to take another drink. And I like to tell that because that's the first time I'd had that thought. I heard myself think and say that at the same time. And somehow I knew it was true. And I can't tell you that I started listening. They were bringing AA meetings into that place. And I don't know if I was paying attention to them or not. But I just knew that was true. So back then we went back. Julie and I had 3 little girls. And one AA meeting in town, I guess, was open because Julie and the kids would go in there. And our youngest daughter could upset a room. She sure upset the hell out of me a lot. And that, but we were going to those meetings there, and then we ended up in Laramie, which is 50 miles away. It had 2 meetings a week. So we're going to school. I'm going to school. Julie's taking a job working in a bakery at Safeways and eating. And our oldest girl started kindergarten in Laramie that time. And on the way over, she told me she thought I was going to be riding the school bus with her to school. The more I think about it, maybe I should have been. But we went to these AA meetings there. Julie went to a meeting they called something family group. They did not call it Al-Anon. There was no Al-Anon literature. Might probably never, none in the whole state. There might not have been any printed yet. I don't know with that. But most of the time, her acquaintance with the 12 steps was through open meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. And most of those were speaker meetings. I'm partial to speaker meetings. I learned more about AA and speaker meetings than I ever have with my mouth open and talking. I seem to have to listen, and I learn more. But that was the start of things for us. With that, I got involved in the program in Laramie, and I had to stay extremely busy. I worked. I took 16, 18 semester out of school to finish college, and I worked 35, 40 hours a week at a part-time job. And I went to AA, but I had to stay that busy because if I had any time off, I was with me. And I had the hole in the belly, and my wind was blowing through it, and it was just terrible. I couldn't stand it. So my first 3 years in the summer, I was started and finished college, went to AA, understood that if I was going to live, I probably had to stay in AA, but I wasn't meeting too many people in AA that were attractive to me in that. I went because most of them stayed sober. I heard some insane stuff in that little meeting in Laramie. And didn't drink. A friend of mine came in. Here I did all that stuff on the Fifth Tradition a minute ago. One of my friends came in there, and he started college in Laramie shortly after I did. And he'd just gotten out of prison in a hospital in Texas because he was down there on some heroin charges. And he was going to AA in Laramie with me for a while. And we'd go to class together, and we'd kind of hang together because there wasn't anybody else our age in the fellowship. And I graduated, and I left. And it took him 20 years to get the program. And he got sober in NA in Arizona finally. I left Laramie. I had a job in Denver. I had never been to a place anywhere that had more than 2 meetings a week. And so I'm stuck in a place in Denver where there's meetings everywhere, every night, night and day. And I was kind of catching on to them. The very worst meeting I attended in AA is the same meeting place where Bob showed up later. Boy, that was a sorry-ass meeting. Did it have the same name it does now? Oh, God. They called it the Happy Way Group, and there wasn't nothing happy about it back then. I hit that nut house at something less than 130 pounds. I was 6 foot 2 inches tall and didn't know I was dying. I hadn't got it with that. And when I got out of that nut house 16 weeks later, I was up to 180 pounds. And I thought I could whip somebody, but I'd never been able to do that, so I didn't. And just in a nutshell, my experience in AA is with 52 years of sobriety. I continue to work steps. But they're laying out of the big book. I just do that. I'm on the phone a whole lot more than my wife wishes I was because I'm working with people in AA, talking about the steps. A couple of them in here call me once in the cow, but they're kind of low maintenance sponsees most of the time. They have their days. But I go regularly to about 2 or 3 meetings a week. That's a lie. I may go to 3 or 4 meetings in a row in a week, and then I may not. But I always go to my home group on Tuesday nights. And I lucky crusty old Thursday morning meeting in the nastiest club in the worst part of town in Indianapolis. And I like to go there because if I go in there at 10:30 in the morning, there's more sobriety amongst that 20, 25 men and women in there than you'll find in any other AA meeting in the city. I say it's because we're all so damned old we can't drive at night anymore. But that's not true. I see some of these guys other places with that. And it's in a part of town that these people are going in there because they have to. Their choices are gone. That's their last chance to get it. And if you can find yourself a place like that, to go show up, and you probably. I went to a guy a few years ago, a long time ago. His name was Earl. And I was in a meeting like that, and I watched him to come into meetings. And Earl had the saddest eyes I've ever seen on anybody. You know, some sheepdogs have sad eyes, but Earl had those beat something awful. And I watched him come into AA, and I watched him suffer for maybe 2-3 weeks. And I've never done it before or since. But I went up to him after a meeting, and I shook his hand, and I held his arm like that, and I said, "Listen to me. I promise you, if you come with me and do what I do with this book and the 12 steps, you'll have a life you can't believe how wonderful it is. I've never done that before, and I've never done that since to anybody." But he took me up on it. And so he and I sat down, we collared a couple other new guys, and we sat down with the big book. And we went through the books and the step. We did that. We called it a workshop. And then later on, we did it with a few more other people. And we got through that. And he made horrible amends. He needed to make. He had been divorced, and his ex-wife, they weren't divorced. I guess they were just separated. But they were living in one part of town, and she was living in one part of town. And he was allowed to see the kids on occasion, had 2 boys. And he got a phone call one night from the wife, and she asked him to come over. And so when he knocked on the door, he heard a shotgun go off. And when he went in the door, she'd taken the top of her head off. And the kids were in there and everything. And they thought for sure he had shot her and killed her. And that had been it. Her parents died thinking he killed her. And taking him through the steps and the pain of that and all that. He never took a drink from the time he first came into AA. He died 3 years ago down in Mexico, happy for the first time in his life with a wonderful lady. And he was active in AA, and he was irritating some of the people that have a little more money than some of us and go down to Puerto Vallarta to live with that, who really didn't want to hear about the book and the 12 steps. But the few of them that took him up on it were happy, and they cried the loudest when he died. And so all I know is I've had a lot of experience with a lot of stuff around AA and AA people. And every once in a while I get a call, and one of my sponsees will call me with something. I have the slightest idea how I can help him. You know, I just don't know. And I'll say, maybe we ought to just sit down and meditate on this, because I don't have a clue what the answer is. And they always seem to get worked out. But I'm glad I'm here, and I'm tired. I know Bob's tired, and I'm glad you're all here, so it's up to you.
Well, my mind isn't working as well as it could, but because it's been a long day. But I'll just let you know where I came from. I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, and I'm the son of an alcoholic, the grandson of an alcoholic, the nephew of an alcoholic. My family all died from alcoholism. And I watched it happen. And it didn't make much of an impression on me, frankly. I just thought, well, that's what happens to some people. And when I was a small kid, like in grade school, I had a wandering eye. Do you know what that is? I had one eye looked over here and one that looked over here. And I had a speech impediment. I couldn't say CHs, so they all came out as Ts. And so I talked funny and I looked funny, and people thought that I was an easy target. So kids thought, well, he can't see well and he talks funny, so I'll beat him up. And they did that a couple times till they figured out what the result was. And by the time I was 12 years old, I could fight my way out of almost anything. When I was 12 years old, my mother told me she didn't have enough money to raise both my sister and I. So I was going to have to go live in foster homes. And I did. And so I lived on farms and all these different places. And what happened to me was that I shut off emotionally. It was just like, we're your new parents. And I, in my mind is going, and so I had an attitude early. And I had a stepbrother that liked to rob things. So we started robbing warehouses when I was like 13 or 14. And when I was 16, I ran a card game in a racetrack, and made a bunch of money. I already knew how to deal seconds, and so my idea was I had no moral compass. So if I was going to be a criminal, I was going to be a good one. When I never even started drinking until I was 17. I was 17 and I started drinking beer with some buddies and stuff. And this odd thing happened, and it happened to my dad too. And that is that I had a radical personality change when I drank. And I would get into altercations all the time. When I was 17, I was drunk on the street in the next town over, and a couple of cops thought it would be fun to roust me, and so they beat the hell out of me and kept throwing me against this brick wall in the downtown area. So about a week later, I took a rifle and a handgun and I blew up the power station that feeds the city. And some guy came out of there and started telling me to stop. And I said, "You got to be nuts." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "I wouldn't be talking to somebody with a gun like that." And I told him I'd just soon shoot him as look at him. And so not long after that, a couple of days, I was at football practice. And 4 detectives came down and yanked my ass right out of football practice and took me to jail and charged me with assault with a deadly weapon. And I went in front of the judge down there, and I was convicted. And he sentenced me to 4 years in the Wisconsin State Penitentiary. And then he said something very odd. He said, "But Mr. Olson, because you have this propensity to shoot people, we think you have a bright future in the military." And so they told me that if I would do 4 years in the military and get an honorable discharge, they'd kill my number and expunge my record. So I went in the Navy because I didn't think you'd get shot in the Navy. And the Navy apparently knew that. And so my job in the Navy, I ran the computer that positioned the main battery in a heavy cruiser, the main guns and the turrets. And they also told me that they wanted me to, if we were going to make a landing somewhere, how do you turn this thing on? They wanted me to make if we were going to make a landing somewhere, me and a Marine would go over in a rubber boat in the middle of the night and set up an observation post and call fire in off the ship. Well, I wasn't real fired up about that. And they kept dropping me off in places where I don't look like anybody. Like Beirut, Lebanon. And I couldn't put enough stuff on to look Arabic. So, by the time I got out of the military, I drank. I mean, I was a full-fledged alcoholic by the time I got out of the military. And I got a job. I had met this girl in France. She came over to see me, and she got pregnant, and so we were going to get married, and I had to find a job, and I was still trying to go to the university, but I needed to make some money first. Anyway, I got a job as a bill collector for a loan company, and I found out I was really good at it. And part of that was because I was more dangerous sober than I was drunk. The problem with me sober is that I'm very frustrated, that I want to drink, and I don't want to get drunk before I go out and get face-to-face with somebody. So I became very, very good at collecting delinquent loans. And I came to the attention of some people who were also in the loan business. But they were like these Sicilian families and in Chicago. And I got up to my ears in that. And I was absolutely insane. One of the guys that I would go out collecting with occasionally was this little Sicilian guy, and we were standing in a bar in Chicago and just shooting the shit, and he looks at me and he said, "Olson, you got to be the coldest son of a bitch I ever met." And this was about as bad a guy as you're ever going to meet. And I thought he was overstating his case, but I think he was right. And I used to go collect these loans, and there was no emotion in it. And I would tell people, I'm not mad at you, but you're going to get hurt. Everybody knew what the deal was. The reason why I tell you this is because by the time I was 26 years old, I figured I had no redeeming social value at all. All I did was hurt people. I got fired. Well, I got first. Somebody talked me into going to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'd been kind of going in and out for 5 years, and so I went to this thing, and I couldn't understand what they were talking about. Nobody was working steps, and for one reason or another, I stopped drinking. One of the big reasons was I was so damn sick my liver was sticking out of my side. It was already the size of a football. I'd just faint spontaneously. I'd be standing there talking to someone and I'd just keel over. And I was asking my doctor. My doctor told me I wouldn't live another couple of years the way I drank. I got fired at this paper company that I was working for. I walked in, I was a marketing director, and I walked into this packaging company, and they made corrugated boxes, among other things. And I walked into that manufacturing plant, and the sales service manager said, "Good morning, Mr. Olson." And I reached across his desk and grabbed him by the lapels and yanked him over the desk and asked him what the hell he meant by that. And amazingly, that company decided that I was a liability. And they were real nice about it because I had made an incredible amount of money for them. And they paid me for a year. And anyway, I went to, I got a different job. I got a job working for a division of Kraft Foods. And they paid me like 60% more than I'd been making at the paper company. And told me they wanted me to move to Denver. So I went out there and I started going to meetings at the mother house there. It's called York Street. And one Sunday night, I heard this guy named Don P. stand up and give a talk. And he was talking about the big book and that you could recover from alcoholism. And I got real curious about it because I thought I was going to drink again, and I didn't know how not to do that. And nobody had ever said you don't ever have to drink again, and all you have to do is the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and everything will change, including almost everything you believe. And so I went up to him afterwards. And I said, I don't know what you're talking about, but I want to know what you're talking about. And what do I have to do? And he said, do you have a sponsor? And I said, no. And he said, well, I can be your sponsor, but you're going to have to come see me every week at my house. And I said, all right. And he explained all 12 steps to me. And then he said, will you agree to do that? Take a couple of days and think about it, because I want you to be sure. And then come back and tell me if you're willing. And I went back and told him I was. Gary was his sponsor. And so it just so happened that the 1975 International Convention of Alcoholics Anonymous was right about then, and it was happening in Denver. And so a whole bunch of us that were in the old Denver Young Peoples were on the hospitality committee for that. And we got up, we went to the convention, and Lois Wilson was there. That was a real thrill for all of us. But there was another guy there named Mac Cheater that came from Winnipeg in Canada. And he talked about a group that he belonged to called the Golden Slippers. And he said there'd been a radical change in the sobriety in that group because they decided to just quit bullshitting around with AA, and they decided to follow all the directions, and they'd started to forward to the first edition, and every time it said to do something, they did it. And the result of that was that more people stayed sober in the Golden Slippers than ever had before. And so we used to travel as a pack. And afterwards, somebody said, why don't we do that? And so we got in this guy's basement, and we started at the forward to the first edition, and we did everything as a group. There were 14 of us, and we got in a group, and we started at the beginning of the book, and we did everything it said. One guy dropped out, a guy named Eddie Durkin. He went downtown, down on Larimer Street, which used to be the Skid Row in Denver, and got his nose full, and walked out of the bar and crawled into a doorway and froze to death. Out of the other 13 of us, 5 of us are still alive. 8 of them died sober. Of the 5 of us that are still alive, Gary and one other, Gary's 52 years as a guy, another guy just turned 52. I'm the baby of the group with 43. This thing really works. Now, why the hell would Gary and I come all the way down here to do this? Right? I got to tell you, you come to me and say get up at 3:45 in the morning, you better duck. Both of our lives have improved so significantly in the years that we've been sober that we're happy to spread the message. The other thing that's a little unusual about us is that both of us work steps on a regular basis. That doesn't mean we went through them once and then, did 10, 11, and 12 until eternity. We really do this stuff. We go through the steps every year, year and a half, or whatever we think is an appropriate time, and seek spiritual growth. And as a result of that, we've been on an adventure for decades. Now, the question you need to ask yourself is, aren't you curious? Don't you kind of wonder who you could be? Do you have any interest at all in what God had in mind when He created you? Do you think you could be what God intended? I got to tell you that I have had spiritual experiences that have absolutely turned my life upside down. I have been the recipient of so much from a God that I didn't even want to believe in. And see, I know that'll work for you too, but the question is, do you have the courage to go out and practice this stuff just to see what happens? Do you? We'll spend the weekend sharing things with you, some of which you may never have heard of. And the whole intent in doing that is not to have the opportunity to sit up here and talk with you. Frankly, I'd rather mow my fucking lawn. But what I want is I want you to have the opportunity to have all the things that have been given to Gary and I just by going out and asking all these questions, by challenging everything that we believe, by taking a look at stuff we don't even want to look at, and sharing that experience with you. You know, neither one of us were nice guys. And frankly, and I've said this on a number of occasions, that if I was God, I would have killed my ass a long time ago. And we just were not examples of good citizenship. So I'm thankful but curious about why God would take people like us, and when I say us, I'm talking about this room, and make us useful. Why do you suppose He does that? See, I thought God wanted nothing to do with me. And He can take people like us who have been down some muddy roads, and He can make us very useful because we can share that experience with other people who've had the same experience. So the question you have to ask yourself this weekend is, am I willing to change my mind? Am I willing to listen to experience that may change everything I believe? I hope to hell you have an open mind, because that's what you're going to need to grow in this program. See, it's obvious, but if you don't have an open mind, you must believe that you know the truth about everything. Man, that is some serious shit. In the 43 years I've been sober, I've almost had to change my mind about everything. Gary's been married 58 in August. 58 years. I have 5 sons that really love me, and I have 3 grandsons that really love me, and I have 2 ex-wives that really don't. So we all have different experiences, and some of us are just better at some things than the rest of us, I guess. So anyways, our intent. Well, we'll talk about intent in the 11th step because your plan for the day ought to involve some of it. But our intent is to come here and give you information that is significant enough to alter the way you think and the way you believe and your willingness to question everything. So that's the point of this.
Do we want to give them a break? Do we want to do more? What do you want to do?
You should take a break.
Take a break. Come back. 15.
Gary, can I borrow your microphone for just 5 minutes? Hi, guys.
Everybody had their break?
Break.
Break. Break's over. So what happened to me on that night I told you about, that the booze really worked for me, and it took me a long time of knocking around in AA, that what caused me to go take that big slug out of that bottle after doing it right the first couple of times we passed it around wasn't necessarily a choice. I had no choice but to take the bigger drinks later. I didn't get that. I didn't understand about what was going on in my body when I put alcohol into it. I just didn't get it. And I really think that I was sitting in a first step meeting somewhere in Denver, and we were talking about this, and we had read the doctor's opinion where he talks about this phenomenon of craving does not happen to the non-alcoholic drinker. The average temperate drinker, I think, is the term he uses. And I remember vaguely this kind of, so that's what it was. And then off and on over time there, when I was looking at the steps for me, I would remember a few of those times that happened. All the times that I had promised that I would be home early. I had promised I wasn't going to take a drink. And I'd been drinking the night before. And I'd promised Julie I wasn't taking another drink today. And I'd be drunk by noon, saying, what happened? What was it? I didn't have a choice. I was still suffering from the alcohol I had in my system from the day before. It was the phenomenon of craving. And I have traced that back through my drinking for a while. I started drinking when I was 16, and I hit the nut house at 24, just a few weeks before my 25th belly button day. And it progressed very quickly. It happened quickly. And when I read that we have lost the choice around alcohol, I knew the book was right, but I couldn't have explained that to you. I just knew that was right, and that's what was going on with me. I know that all those times let me back up. When I was early in AA, or long before that, I was a liar, a cheat, and a thief. I didn't have to add alcohol to my system to become a liar, a cheat, and a thief. I had that down pretty good, but the alcohol greased it. And it, like you had to practice it because one day you might really need it. I don't know what it was. But, and that went into my sobriety quite a while, early in AA. I still find myself thinking that every woman in the world who's ever known me ought to have sex with me. I still thought I ought to be able to get money for no particular reason. I was a bad check artist. And let me back. I was not an artist. Don't misunderstand me. I was just a thief. And I would go into the bars when I was drinking. And back in Cheyenne back then, along the back bar, they would have counter checks from the 3 or 4 banks in the city. And I'd ask the bartender to give me a check, and he'd say which bank, and it didn't matter. I didn't have an account in any of them. But I didn't think it was a big deal. So I was writing bad checks, and then I'd get a payday, and I'm chasing down my bad checks, and it was a horrible game. And it's funny when I'm thinking about the phenomenon of craving was going on, was driving that so much when I was drinking. While I was locked in the nut house, that's 16 weeks, my father-in-law had picked up a couple, 3 of them, because they knew he was my father-in-law, and they told him about him, and so he picked them up. So I had those to take care of when I got out. First job I had when I got out of there was I'd gone to work for Beeman Beverage. My father-in-law had arranged for me to go to work for him. They were the Coors beer distributors, as well as a number of soft drinks, and I don't remember what they were, but I went and got in a semi first week out of the nut house with a truck driver there, and we drove down to Golden, Colorado to the brewery, and we parked it and we waited, and then they filled it up with beer, and we drove it back up to Cheyenne and emptied it into the warehouse. And the next morning we got it up and put it in the little 6-wheeler delivery trucks and took it around to the bars that they were delivering it to. And I had bad checks sitting in 4 of those bars. And the difference is the last time those guys had seen me, I weighed about 130 pounds and certainly didn't look healthy. And at that point in time, I'm 30, 40 pounds heavier, and I'm working, and I'd come in there and I'd stack the beer in the back room, and they'd sit and look at me, and is that him? And I'd get a payday, and I'd go down there and I bought my bad check back. And, went through that first thing. And I see all of that behavior was a part of the phenomenon of craving. I had to do something to get that booze back, and the possibility that would say, it's a good thing I wasn't in Texas, because they used to put you in jail for writing a non-sufficient funds check. And the phenomenon of craving was taking my whole life. It was keeping me from going home to my wife and children. It was keep me from making a living. It was take power. And I think, you remember waking up in the morning or in the middle of the night or something like that, and that hole in your belly and the wind would be blowing through it, and you're just dying, you wish you had a drink to do it. Sometimes I did have enough underneath the bed or something like that to get me by. I had no choice in that. That was part of my alcoholism, the phenomenon of craving. All those things I was talking about. And the first 23 pages in the doctor's opinion in our big book talk about the disease, the phenomenon of craving in our bodies. In pages 23 to 43, we're talking about that phenomenon where we'll have no effective mental defense against that first drink. It will not be the craving driving it. It's the obsession, and when that comes up. And I remember reading that, and I remember the line in there that talks about, if you ask me why I took that first drink, If I'm being honest, I'll tell you I have no idea. And I remember sitting there reading it, and I said, yeah, I don't know why I did that. I didn't. Everything was fine. I was getting along with Julie okay at home. The boss wasn't mad at me. Hell, the dog would even come in the same room. And it was, everything fine. The kids would talk. Julie talks about the time that she'd gone out to play bridge with the girls, I guess. And I was left home to babysit our little girls. The youngest one was a baby in a crib. And the other two were more than toddlers. One of them was probably 3 and the other one was 4.5. They were about 18 months apart. And I knew I was going to babysit that night, and so I had stashed something to drink out in the backyard, so I'd have it there as soon as she left to drink it. And so when Julie comes home, the older girl, the middle girl, is in on the table, the kitchen table, and she's making some kind of whatever it is. Maybe she's baking a cake, but it was red and green and sticky and whatever it was. And I'm passed out on the floor, and Carrie's washing my hair with ketchup and whatever the hell it is. And that really doesn't have much. One thing that helps it too is I'd gotten blind drunk in short order there. And she loves to tell that story. She still laughs about it. I think, I don't want to take too much time on this, but one of the biggest things for me to understand is particularly, the time we got the message from Winnipeg, and that the time to go in the steps, and what little bit I had done trying to work steps on my own, tried reading the 12 and 12 because I thought it was easier to read, but I wasn't getting any better. And all those things, I'm not sure I had the understanding of the phenomenon of craving or the thing that goes on, that queer mental obsession that would draw that to make that happen. And that was really key for me. I think to all of a sudden understand that my help from that had to come from something beyond my good thinking or Bob's good thinking or anybody else's. It had to come from God. I came from a place where there was no God. Growing up where I grew up, you'd get spanked for it because it was a swear word to say God or Jesus. And it just wasn't a part of my life. But that was really a key thing, I think, looking back on it, for me to grasp the program. I really had to find out what I was and how it worked and how I couldn't do much about it without help. You're up.
I'd been in and out of AA for 5 years, but I just didn't get it. I didn't. I used to go to meetings when I started feeling guilty, and I'd go in there, and then somebody'd come up and stroke me and tell me everything was going to be all right, and it was just bullshit. It wasn't going to be all right. You know, because I didn't know what to do to make it all right. So I finally was so sick I was either going to die or get sober. And I was laying on the floor of an empty house. My wife had moved out, taken our 2 sons with her, and I was laying on a hardwood floor trying to figure out whether I was hallucinating or not, and these 2 guys from AA came in, And they walked in my front door. It must have been unlocked, I guess. And one of them was a guy who had offered to be my sponsor before, and he had a new guy with him. And I was trying to figure out whether what I was looking at was real or not. I was still about half messed up. And the new guy that he brought with him it was like he had St. Vitus dance or something. He was jumping around me going, oh my God, what are we going to do with him? Oh shit, he is messed up. What do we do with him? Should we go look for some honey or something, orange juice? They used to give that shit to you a long time ago. And the old guy who had offered to be my sponsor said, let's just see if we can get him up. And but this other guy is dancing around going, oh my God, what are we going to do? Should we take him to the hospital? He really looks sick. Do you think he's going to die? See, if I would have had a gun, I would have shot that son of a bitch. So they got me up, and they took me to a halfway house. Not to be a resident. They just didn't know what else to do with me. And there was a priest in there that ran it. And I was a German Lutheran, which didn't, it was like, yeah, well, I don't think so. And he said, is your life unmanageable? And I said, for Christ's sake, they just carried me in here. And he said, are you a drunk? And I went, yeah. And he said, can you stop? And I said, no. And he said, do you believe in God? And I said, no. And I just said it to piss him off. Well, one of the funny things that happens to people like us is that we will spit in the face of people trying to help us. And when I said, he said, do you believe in God? And I said, no. And then he looked at me and he said, then you're shit out of luck. Which I thought was inappropriate for a priest. And I said, why? And he said, you can't stop, right? And I said, no. And he said, we can't stop you either. There aren't enough people in this city to stop you from taking another drink if you want one. And I said, then what's the point? And he said, God's the only thing that can save you. Well, that was not good news. Not to me. I figured I had not led a good life. I had led a life that was bad by choice. And then all of a sudden, here comes the reckoning. And I'm sitting there going, this isn't good news. And this, he said, the priest said, look, try to pray and see if it works. So when you go home, and they were going to take me back to this house and drop me off, then ask God to keep you sober and to help you survive your experience. So I went home, and I went into DTs, hallucinated about all kinds of weird shit. I mean, like big insects coming out from under the refrigerator and everything. I saw ants as big as this table coming out from underneath my refrigerator. This is no shit. I put a bear hug on that refrigerator, picked it up, and walked it across the room, looking for the hole that the ants were coming out of. And then I ran down in the basement stairs and I got 3 cans of Raid and I emptied them all in this little tiny kitchen and damn near asphyxiated myself. I was flopping around like a fish out of water, and knowing that I was going to die every minute. I was 90 days sober before it occurred to me that I might not die from alcoholism. And I mean, I'm not talking about next week. Every day when I got up, I thought I would die that day from alcoholism. And I wasn't drinking. But the physical effects of stopping were so pronounced on me that I never thought I could survive the experience. I thought I'd just seize up and die. This one guy kept telling me, try to pray, try to pray, try to pray. And see this, this priest that ran the halfway house? He'd go, you like to fish? And I go, yeah, actually I do. And he'd say, well, I got a boat. And there was a lake right there that's 741 square miles, Lake Winnebago. And so he'd say, you want to go out and see if we can catch some walleyes? And I went, yeah. And he would take me out in the middle of Lake Winnebago, and then he would say, so what do you think about God? How the hell do you get away? And I said, well, I try not to think about God. And he said, well, do you think he might save you? Or are you even willing to consider that? And he kept pushing this whole idea about pray in the morning, pray at night. And I did that. And then my sponsor came up to me and he said, why are you sober today? And I said, I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he said, bullshit. You never got sober before being a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Something else is going on. And what was going on was I was praying to something I didn't believe in. Now, before I can even get to that, I have to understand that I'm an alcoholic, which means I am caught in the trap. So the phenomenon of craving, yeah. And they asked me about that, and I said, what exactly is that? And they said, that is when you take a drink, you want another one. Does that happen to you when you drink? Because it doesn't happen to a non-alcoholic. And I said, yeah. See, that's where the average temperate drinker can take a drink and put it away. I watched one of my kids doing that. They said, I said, what do you want for your 21st birthday? They said, well, I'd like a 6-pack of Heinekens. And I said, okay. So I got him a 6-pack of Heinekens, and he drank half the bottle, and he went out and did something. And I'm sitting there staring at the goddamn bottle. And I'm going, what about the rest of it? And, I mean, my idea of alcohol and what you should do with it aren't normal. And so I said, what are you going to do with that? And he said, I don't know, probably nothing. Stuff like that makes my head explode. If I take a drink, I want another one. And when I take another one, I want another one. And I will keep doing that until everything goes to hell in a handbasket. And see, I don't want to live that way. Everybody who lives with an alcoholic ought to have a target painted on their forehead. Because alcoholics, and I suspect others who have addiction problems, will almost invariably attack the people they love. If you live close to someone, you're going to be a target. And I don't want to do that to my wife, and I didn't want to do that to my kids, and I didn't want to do any of that. But that's what happens. And when and I told you before that when I start drinking, I have a personality change. I want to hit people. I used to take my wife out to a restaurant, and I would see some guy sitting in the restaurant, and I would automatically hate him. And what kind of insanity is that? And I'd walk up to him and go, let's go outside. The guy'd go, who the hell are you? I take a drink and it's bar the door. If when you honestly want to, you find you can't quit entirely. Or if once you start, you have little control over the amount you take, you're probably alcoholic. I'd honestly want to quit, and I'd say I was going to quit, and I couldn't quit. And then I'd say I'm going to have 2 drinks on the way home, and I wouldn't come home till Thursday. And it wasn't because I didn't love my wife or my kids. Do you know my first wife used to daydream about me getting killed in a car accident. Yeah. I mean, she'd sit there and big smile on her face and see me in a tangled mess and just think that son of a bitch finally got it. And a whole lot. I'll tell you that even when I was drinking, I made a lot of money. I am good at making money, and I don't know what that is. But I just have a facility for it. And so I was making... you remember when the savings and loans gave away all that stuff for deposits? I was the single largest Corningware distributor in the United States at that point. And I sold it all to savings and loan associations. I used to make $800,000 to $1 million a year doing that stuff. But I wouldn't touch the checkbook because I was so messed up with it. So I told my wife, you handle the checkbook. And so some years later when we got divorced, the reason why we got divorced was I came in from another trip. I was working like 14 hours a day. And I said, how much money do we have in the bank? And she said, there's no money in the bank. And I said, you can't spend money that fast. And she said, well, there isn't any. And then we got divorced, and a couple of years later I got a bill from the IRS for interest income. And I said, I don't have any interest-bearing accounts. There wasn't any. And so I went to her and I said, I worked that back, and there's $500,000 somewhere. And she said, I never trusted you, you son of a bitch. Wow. That's some kind of marriage, huh? The only reason why I tell you that story is because people who live with alcoholics don't trust them, because there's no way to trust what they're going to do next. Yeah. And so she rat-holed $500,000. And I'm just blithely going to work every day and not even knowing she's doing it. And had the IRS not sent me that bill, I would have never known she'd taken it. And when she said, "Are you going to reopen the divorce?" and I said no, because I know I can do this all over again. I'm not afraid to, and you're going to need that money. So, God bless her. So, and if I went out and started drinking, you couldn't tell when that thing was going to end or how it was going to end. When I lived in Minnesota, I called the police, who were very familiar with me. And I lived in a suburb of Minneapolis. And I called the police department and I said, "I think I'm having a heart attack and I need a ride to the hospital." And they said, "Who is this?" And I said, "Bob Olson." And they went, "You're going to have to figure it out yourself, Bob. That's no shit." I don't want to live that way. I don't want to be a threat to my family. I don't want to be out of control. My dad died from alcoholism. He was bad drunk, married 9 times. And women thought he was best thing since sliced bread until they got him home. And he had a stroke and they sent him to the Grand Army Home in Wisconsin, and he died there. And the only person that came to his funeral was his brother. And that's the way drunks die. The 4 horsemen of alcoholism are terror, bewilderment, frustration, and despair. And despair is the worst. That's when there's no hope. That's when you know you're going down. And you can't even slow it down. Why the hell would anyone want to live that way? So, what's the point here? The point is, figure out if you have the problem. Because if you don't know you have the problem, you can't do anything about it. That's why the first step is to figure out what the problem is. And once you know what the problem is, you can start through the steps. But unless you know that you're hooked on this stuff, there isn't much hope for you. The good news is that once you've determined that you have the problem, you can do something about it. And see, I caved in to alcoholism. I knew I was going to die from it. I just didn't know you could stop. But I had already determined that I was going to be just another dead drunk. And then somebody started telling me there was a way out. And so I looked at that to figure out if I really was an alcoholic. And you know what? When I go through the steps, I don't start at step 4. I started at step 1. And what I do is ask myself this question: is it possible that I've been confused for 43 years and that I'm not a real alcoholic and that I just bought a line of shit and went with it. I got to tell you, it isn't hard to refute that. I'm a real one, and but I can't proceed through these steps until I've determined the problem, and then you can start with, am I willing to believe? But you got to know first. And see, there's no doubt in my mind, and there has been no doubt in my mind for over 40 years. I've got the problem, and if I want to survive it, I've got to keep doing what I'm doing. So, that's it.